Mr. President, ladies and gentlemen, Bertolt Brecht, in his play on Galileo, has a memorable scene where Galileo, under physical pressure, meaning torture by the Inquisition, retracts on his scientific discoveries. A disciple of his is attending the court session, and he says with disdain, "Unhappy are the people who have no heroes." To which Galileo answers, "No, my friend, unhappy are the people who still have a need for heroes." I think you will all agree that we, the Palestinians, have still a need for heroes. And I would like us today to devote this session to the collective Palestinian hero, the Palestinian people themselves, who have impressed the world with their courage, determination, endurance, and resilience. My second point, ladies and gentlemen, in the early 60s, two political scientists among the most eminent, Daniel Bell in Harvard and Raymond Aron in Paris, wrote books about the end of ideology. In the early 90s, Fukuyama wrote a book about the end of history. And I remember André Fontaine, the editor-in-chief of Le Monde, said, if we are really living the end of history, then it's the beginning of boredom. But today I would like to pay tribute to the student movement in Europe, but mainly in America, because they have proven that we are not witnessing the end of idealism. And many of them today are being persecuted, driven out of their universities and even out of the country. My third point is to say that I have been the wandering Palestinian, having lived in 12 different countries. And in each of those countries, I have very good Jewish friends of mine who were among the most ethical people I've ever met. They were all uncomfortable with Israeli policies and practices, which make them excellent friend of mine. And I would like to remember Sarah Roy from Harvard, Avi Schlein from Oxford, Jean Mendelssohn in France, who told me that in the early 80s, a family friend of his, Simon Nora, who was a grandee of the Socialist Party in France, which was then on the rise, becoming the dominant party in France. He went to visit Israel, came back shocked and by what he saw, the macho mentality, the militaristic inclination, and the way they treated the indigenous Palestinian population. And he said something which I believe is extremely profound. He said, those Israelis are no more Jews. For Simon Nora, Jews in Europe were intellectual, liberal, progressive, cosmopolitan, internationalists. And that was not the case of the Israeli society implanted in Palestine. I would like to take also advantage of this session to pay tribute to those many Jews in America, in Washington and in New York, who demonstrated vocally, visibly, by saying not in our name. And I believe tomorrow, in tomorrow's political and diplomatic battles, there'll be a convergence between us who would like to liberate the Palestinian territories occupied by Israel and those who would like to liberate Israel of its occupied territories, because they know the erosion and the corrosion that occupation and perpetuation of oppression creates in their society. My friends, I believe that Jews around the world and in Israel, Palestine, need to do some soul searching, because they, more than anybody else, know the price that we Palestinians had to pay individually and collectively so that Israel can be created in the Middle East. And I believe today that if a Palestinian state is our right, it's the moral duty and the ethical obligation for Jews around the world because of that fact. Isaac Deutscher, putting aside the machinations of great powers and the calculations of a political movement, summarized the Israeli-Palestinian problem in human terms by saying it's a conflict between a person who had to jump from a building on fire, landed on another person whose back he broke. And each time that other person tries to stand up, he receives a beating. And I believe the world today is saying, when enough is enough. And I personally believe, like the rabbi in New York in the 60s during the Vietnam War, when he said, in a democratic society, if a few are guilty, all are responsible. And I believe what is inflicted on us, we Palestinians in Palestine, is a democratic oppression, meaning an oppression, a persecution, and an occupation, supported by a knowing public opinion. The Israeli voter, the Israeli citizen, the Israeli soldier knows what is being done to us and votes massively in favor of those who would like to perpetuate the unsupportable, unbelievable conditions in which we live. Now, ladies and gentlemen, anti-Semitism has been weaponized against us Palestinians and pro-Palestinians. And I believe that we, the Palestinians, are against anti-Semitism for three reasons. One, we are universalists. We believe that there is one mankind and not different kinds of men and women. Number two, we are Semites, while most of the Israelis cannot prove their Semitic origin. And number three, I believe our enlightened self-interest makes us to be anti-Semitism, because it's anti-Semitism that saved Zionism from historical oblivion. Let us not forget that until 1933, the date of the accession of the Nazi Party to power in Germany, Zionism was a minority tendency within the Jewish communities of Europe. It's Nazi atrocities and Nazi barbarity that pushed Jews into the hands of Zionism. Now let me tell you, I've never liked or indulged in comparative martyrology. I believe each tragedy stands on its own. I don't believe there is a hierarchy of suffering. If I were a Jew and a Gypsy, Nazi barbarity is the most atrocious thing that happened in the history of mankind. If I were a Native American, a Red Indian, it would be the arrival of the first European settlers that resulted almost in my total extermination. If I were a Black African, it would be slavery in yonder centuries and apartheid in the last century. If I were an Armenian, it would be the Ottoman persecution and massacre. And if I happen to be a Palestinian, and I happen to be a Palestinian, it would be the Nakba of 1948. Humanity should condemn all the above, and you represent humanity in this home. And I personally believe that we don't know of any mechanism to measure pain or to quantify suffering. Each tragedy stands on its own. Now, ladies and gentlemen, we the Palestinians, who have been dispossessed and dispersed to the periphery of our country, we have moved faster than those who chose to be our opponents towards mutual recognition beyond double negation. Now, we have been unreasonably reasonable. We, the Palestinian National Movement, have adopted the two-state solution. We wanted a winner-winner equation and not a winner-loser equation. And no society wants to be relegated to being the eternal loser of society. I believe that we, the Palestinians, have accepted that we are asking for possible justice and not absolute justice. We are being unreasonably reasonable. Yet the peace process in which we got engaged at the beginning of the 90s resulted in the expansion of occupation instead of the withdrawal of occupation through the elastic growth of the illegal settlements in the occupied territories. And since we had direct negotiations, disproportionate and asymmetrical, the Israeli side tended to believe that they can dictate the conditions, the ceiling of the possible, the ceiling of the permissible, and the pace of progress, if any. During those years, as I told you, we witnessed the expansion of occupation instead of the withdrawal of occupation. Why did I say we were unreasonably reasonable? Because we, the Palestinians, aligned ourselves on the international consensus of the two-state solution. It's not the world that has aligned itself on our preference. We aligned ourselves on the international consensus. So in a way, the moral duty of the international community is to help us achieve it. I remember Clare in the year 2000, I produced a booklet. I was then ambassador in London. I produced a booklet on the eve of the millennium. And I said, we hope to present to the world peace in the Middle East as our gift to the world. And if we are incapable, it should be the gift of the world to us in the Middle East. Now let me tell you, I personally believe that the Israelis, who are a very capricious society, believe that they can decide the contours and the content of the future peace. I believe peace is too important to be left to the Israelis to decide upon. There is something called international law, and we have just witnessed the General Assembly of the United Nations asking the International Court of Justice for an advisory opinion concerning the occupation and the illegality of occupation. And the International Court of Justice, the 15 judges of them, produced a document which is a summary of all the resolutions taken concerning Israel and Palestine, and we are ready to endorse it tomorrow. And I believe the international community should help us obtain it. I will not concede from you. I personally believe that peace in the Middle East should be imposed by the international community on the local level. What is democratically acceptable today to Israeli society is unacceptable to us Palestinians. And what is acceptable to us Palestinians is unacceptable to the Israelis. Peace is too important to be left to the Israelis to decide upon. The Israeli citizen voter believes that if I vote for Labour, which almost has dwindled in significance, we give them back 80% of the occupied territory. If we vote for the centrist party, we might give them 60% of the occupied territories, and if we vote to Likud, we might give them 40% of the territory, and if we vote for Smotrich and Ben-Gvir, we give them a kick. So no, that's not the way it should be. I believe that international law should be our compass guiding our diplomatic endeavors. Unfortunately, up to now, we have witnessed the self-inflicted impotence of the international community because of the American administration attitude. And this has been a constant from administration to administration to administration. For example, at one moment we had the quartet. The quartet was organized by the USA, Russia, the European Union, and the UN to represent all the others. But in fact, this quartet was a one-tet operation, with the Americans monopolizing decision-making. You know, de Gaulle in '67, and this is why I'm a Gaullist, my friend Makram was intrigued. How come I am Palestinian from the third world and a fan of de Gaulle? De Gaulle is a statesman like they make them no more. And after '67, he had an idea of his own called la concertation à quatre, meaning the coordination of the four major powers, Popular China, Soviet, and the Security Council. And he wanted those four major powers to meet, agree on what is the desirable solution, and signal unequivocally to the local belligerent parties what the world expects from them. Unfortunately then, in '67, the Americans were unexcited for the idea because they considered the Israeli military victory as a compensation for the humiliations in Vietnam. The Soviet Union, short-sighted like it frequently could be, preferred the bipolar relationship and said, why should we give equal status to lesser countries like England and France? The English were unexcited simply because the idea was French to begin with. And my friends, since then, we are having a durable process instead of lasting permanent peace. I personally believe we should go back to the de Gaulle idea of the international community gifting us the peace as enunciated by the International Court of Justice, which is very detailed, by the way, and we endorse every paragraph of it. The last point I would like to address is the following. It's the American-Israeli relationship, because I believe that our battle for statehood and independence and sovereignty will either be won in Washington or will be lost in Washington. I'm hopeful, because I believe this battle is winnable. Dear friends, Dean Acheson, who was at the beginning of the 50s American Secretary of State, a great man, by the way, unlike the Blinken we grew accustomed to the last 16 months, who works more for Bibi than for Biden. Dean Acheson wrote his memoirs titled Present at the Creation, and it all centers around the creation of the United Nations and the new world order post-Second World War. And he says one sentence, my friends, which is extremely useful. He says, the UN Charter is a condensed version of American philosophy and American ideology. I'm mentioning this because I, for one, would hope that one day, during my lifetime, I will see American foreign policy at the service of the UN and not a UN at the service of American foreign policy. And I would like the actual American administration, the Trump administration, to bear that in mind. Dean Acheson saying the UN Charter is not something abominable that we should fight against and cut budgets and help, etc. On the contrary, the UN principles, the Charter, are a condensed version of what is supposed to be American ideology and American philosophy. Number two, I want to remind, and I know that the Academic Union has a special relationship with President Trump and a debate around how to qualify him. I would like to remind Donald Trump that in 2015, when he started running for the primaries for his first election, he started by saying that he was in favor of American neutrality in the Middle East. And he was winning primaries with that in part of his program. It's only unfortunately when the Christian evangelical Zionists, etc., joined him and embraced him that he started siding totally with the Israeli preferences. I would like to remind him that he started his presidential campaigns in 2015 favoring American neutrality. And I fully agree that American neutrality in regional conflicts should be the name of the game. Let me tell you something. American society is a fascinating society. It's the world en miniature. It's a nation of nations. And when America sides with one belligerent party in a regional conflict, not only it antagonizes all the other parties in the region, it antagonizes and offends part of the American national fabric. It wasn't easy to be an Arab American, a Palestinian American, or a Muslim American all throughout those decades, because your country of adoption was top sympathetic for the difficulties and the ordeals and the injustices in your country of origin. So America, as a dominant power in the international system, has an interest of being non-aligned in regional conflicts so as not to offend part of its own national social fabric, which was the history of the last 60 years. My friends, I believe there are two Americas, not one America, and it goes beyond the demarcation between Democrats and Republicans. Yes, there is the America of the early settlers who came from Europe and resulted in almost the total extermination of the indigenous population. Yes, there is the America that expanded shamelessly at the detriment of Mexico, swallowing Texas and California and many other mini states. There is the America that institutionalized slavery. That's the America with which, when they say shared values, which Israel probably stems from. But there is, fortunately for us, another America. The America of the founding fathers that defies the colonial power. There is the America who took the brave decision of undergoing a civil war to rid itself from slavery. There is the America of Woodrow Wilson, who came to the Versailles Conference after the First World War, upholding the principle of self-determination. And there is the America of Martin Luther King, who had a dream which we shared across the oceans and across the continents. That's the America we are engaging today with. That's the America that is producing today that there is a majority, comfortable majority of support for Palestinians within democratic ranks that Kamala Harris was unaware of. This is why she lost the elections, because she made no gesture during the month and a half of her campaign. And I believe that the better for American hearts and minds is winnable, especially that today we are no more challenging Israel's existence, but its expansion. And I believe that America has no interest on the strategic level of Israel maintaining control of the hilltops or the Jordan Valley. What's America's interest? It, the global power, with Israeli territorial appetite. So I believe the battle for Washington, if we wage it correctly, is a winnable battle. Now, my friends, I never belong to the optimistic school of thought that promises victory and salvation to the oppressed. Unfortunately, I believe history is a cemetery for oppressed people who remained oppressed until they vanished into the historical oblivion. And today, the moral challenge, the political challenge in the Middle East is the following. We either have one people, too many, this time we the Palestinians, or we have a state which is missing and needs to be created. The answer of the international community in the UN and elsewhere is that there is a state missing, needing to be created. I have news for you. History is still undecided. So the challenge for each one of us is the following: how to help history make the right choice, because it hasn't always made the right choice. Thank you.